We're good?
Mhm.
All right, so I think we are live. So thanks for that, Arman. Hi everybody, and thank you guys for tuning in. This is our eighth episode of the Weekly Supervise, and we're so excited to have you here with us today. As always, I have my co-host Arman, and we have a very special guest, Lucas, who's here to talk to us about the challenges of working at an enterprise while having a side gig at a startup. Additionally, if we have enough time, he will share some tips on how financial institutions tackle anti money laundering in a data driven way. A few quick reminders before we start. If you have any questions that you want to ask Lucas, feel free to ask it in our Slack channel or on our YouTube. So you can leave comments here below, and we will make sure to get those questions to Lucas. Without further ado, just wanted to thank again Lucas for being here today. We're so excited to learn more about your experience. So excited to have you, and yeah, thanks for being here.
Yeah,
Um,
thank you, Amber.
so could we start with, do you mind telling us a bit about yourself and your work experience and expertise?
Yeah, sure. First, thanks Amber and Armand to having me here today. And hello everyone. I'm Lucas, and currently I'm a data scientist at Intech Data Lab. It's one of the largest P&C insurance company in Canada. And previously, I got my master degree in computer science from University of Waterloo in 2019. And after that, I joined Scotiabank as a data scientist in the anti-money laundering department under a team called Strat Monitoring. And I just switched to Intech this February. And on the side, I also work on a startup company called Lingo as a lead developer there, help managing the dev team. And Lingo is working on developing communication tools for people under non-verbal conditions, and also serve as a training tool they will use in their therapy sessions with the therapist. Yep, that's pretty much about me and my expertise. Obviously, I came from a computer science background, so there's some software engineer, and of course more about data scientists and NLP related and machine learning, etc.
And also, if I may add something, so Lucas and I, we know each other for a while. We used to work together, so that's how I lured him into coming and joining us as a guest today. So on two different occasions, I personally had the pleasure of working with Lucas.
Yeah, I did my co-op term in Deloitte DSpace in Armand's team. So Armand was my team lead, and we will work on an interesting project related to NLP about how to automate the process of authoring the text technical report. Yeah, that's a very exciting project as well.
Exactly.
That's so cool.
All right, so this is pretty cool. A good opening, I think. And the number of people who are joining us is increasing as well. I really like that. So Lucas, why don't we jump right into it with the tough question? So we've been working with an enterprise team at least in 3 different occasions. So in Deloitte and the bank, and right now at Intact. You've also been working at a startup. Based on the past couple of years of experience that you've had, and most, if not all of it, has been hands-on, right? So you're not far away from, like, you're not like a VP of engineering yet, which is a good thing, I think. Because most of our audience members, I would say, belong to the group that are still hands-on. So they could, if you share some of your tips and tricks, it's going to be useful for them. But can you talk a little bit about some similarities and some differences between these two, I don't know, settings? Maybe setting is a good word to use here. What is it other than the regular, hey, we write code or things like that you see, similar? And what are the biggest differences in your opinion? Because you keep changing the setting pretty much every day, or at least every week, right?
Yeah. So to me, like no matter whether it's a enterprise team or it's a startup team, you have to work with different people. So collaboration and teamwork is always a very important key in your daily work. And even though startup company has much less people, but it can increase the chances like your coworkers actually come from totally different background. In my case, like lingo, we have people for me from computer science, and we have people from the linguistic psychology or the behavioral like speech therapists, and so like designing, marketing people as well. So everyone comes from a very different background. So you have to learn how to talk to them, like speak their language to make sure your ideas they can get your ideas. And I think that's similar in the enterprise team, but maybe it won't happen so frequently. But if your team has to work on something with other departments on the same project, because for data science projects, it's usually quite business focused or customer faced. So you definitely use the similar communication strategy as well. And the second thing is, even though maybe stand-up company, in the beginning, it can be a little bit chaotic, but we still want to deliver our products with the high standards. And you have to follow the similar best practice as you would do in the big companies. Let's say for code reviews, you have to follow all the best coding patterns as you will do in Google, and we will expect similar thing in the startup company like Lingo. Otherwise, even though it's a small, comparatively small project, but it will still affect whether your project is easy to maintain or update in the future. So that's very important as well. But speaking of that, that actually brings up the biggest differences in Lingo, or not in Lingo, but in all different types of startup companies, because it's a startup, so you have to do everything from scratch. So in the big company, in the enterprise company, you already have all the rules or procedures standardized for you. So you just basically get in there, get onboarded, and just follow whatever the company has made the rules for you. You just follow the best practice. But in startup company, you are probably the one who will set up the policies for the whole team. It's the same in Lingo, like me or Among. We were the people who set up all the policies or the workflow, how we should, how the different people with different rules, how we should collaborate with each other, and what will be our responsibilities, and how we should, let's say, approve a design, and how we should implement and then review the products, the deliverables. And this whole workflow, we have to set up the rules, we have to set up, let's say, the testing procedures and what kind of protocol we should use in our day-to-day work, so that we can make this whole process smooth. Otherwise, even though it's maybe just a small team, it can be very messy, and you will find things keep changing, and you just like, today I want to do a design A, but tomorrow someone told me you should use design B, and it's like we'll never get a point to launch our project. So that's a same thing. And I have to admit, like in some startup company, maybe we don't have people with much experience as like you can find in the enterprise company. So in the beginning, might be a bit painful. So for me, especially, it's like I have to go on a trial and error basis, and I have still to learn from other mentors like Armand or like my team leads in my full-time job, like in Intech or Scotiabank. I learn how those big companies, how they standardize the process, how they set the rules for coding patterns or code reviews or the testing, the product testing, etc. And more especially how they set up the rules about management and how they collaborate with other different departments. So even though startup is small, but it contains all the different components as well. So you'll need those type of skills or those type of procedures similar as an enterprise team. Like, basically everything is quite necessary. And if you ignore some part, because you say, we only have, let's say, 10 people, we don't really need to care about it. We can just talk to them directly, but it can make things get crazy very soon. Yeah.
I have a question, a fun question to ask as a follow-up.
Yeah.
Which is it harder, or has been harder for you? In which setting, actually? Saying no to people. Is it harder in a startup or in an enterprise?
saying no to people.
Yeah. So the example that you provided in terms of change of design, for instance, is a good example, right?
Yeah,
Sometimes you have to say no, not gonna happen, right?
Yeah, that's really tough. Like, I can't really see like which one is harder. I will say in different settings you have to use different techniques or follow different ways to say no. Let's say in enterprise team, for me, like I'm not that senior, so on my top there are so many directors, managers, and basically maybe they will let us know this is a plan, but we can more bring it as a question, like speak out our doubts, like why we want to do it in this way, why we change our plan, or why we think we should use this method instead of the other one. And you can bring up your questions, and maybe sometimes you need to do some quick POC type prototyping to prove your concept, to make sure like give them some proof like your idea is better in some sense. So it's more about maybe the process is a bit more formal. Like you should show you can bring up your question, and you can show your approval to support your arguments, and then there might be some discussion and debates over, and in the end everyone will come to on the same page, and you will make an agreement. But in the startup company, I would say maybe it really depends on who you are working with and which kind of background they're from. Let's say in Lingo, I hope the founder won't hate me, but everyone is from different backgrounds. So basically everyone has different mindsets. They are thinking or seeing the world in a different way. So even though you are thinking or you are trying to solve the same problem, everyone will pay attention to different components, like different. They will have different levels of priority or importance. And I will say, like, first of all, communication is very, very important. You have to make sure you are speaking the same language. You have to make sure you understand why they think this is important, and you can try to convey them like why doing this in this way will be a better way. You have to, but sometimes maybe you have to let them to kind of give them some experience, like they can see by themselves, okay, do this way really get a messy result, so maybe next time let's do the other way around. They can, if they are reasonable, and I guess everyone basically are reasonable, so they will get the point. Maybe sometimes if it's too hard, let's say because for software project there are a typical development pattern or development workflow we have to follow. That's based on all the previous engineers' experience. They kind of summarize this is the best way you should follow, and there are certain workflow you must to obey to. Otherwise, your products or your project always delayed, or your product cannot really satisfy your requirements. And sometimes it's really hard to decide maybe to someone from a different background, because to them it's like, why if it's only take half day, why I can't just solve it like quickly update the, let's say, the one function very soon? Why we want to go through the whole process, like we want to set up this feature, and we want to have a discussion, and we want to prove the design, and then we want to plan for the task to really implement it, and then we want to test it. Why we can just like say, I want this button and I want it right away, let's get it done, because it won't take half a day, more than half a day. Why we can't do this? So communication is important. And you just need to try that. You first need to stand in their shoes and try to understand why they think that way, and try to get them to understand, seeing the things from your eyes, like why this matters in the sense of a software project. And basically in the end they will get it. So it's the different techniques, and that's a good thing for me to learn as well in startup company. Some very useful communication skills.
Yeah, I think like talking about like communication and just general project management, like working with teams of different people, I think that's a really, really important point. So I kind of have a follow-up question related to that. You talked a little bit about the differences between enterprise and startup and what it's like actually working in both of those fields. But what are the biggest challenges? And you alluded to this already earlier, but what are the biggest challenges and benefits in working for an enterprise versus like a startup? Maybe something along the lines of like project scope, collaboration, communication,
Mhm.
generally just working with people from different backgrounds, as you mentioned earlier. I guess like what are your thoughts on the biggest challenges and benefits, if any?
Yeah, actually, it can kind of echo what I mentioned earlier. To me, working in an enterprise company is really a good way to learn the best practices or some mature workflow for the whole project, like how you should clear your requirement and specify what you want to do and came a design, or in the end to implement and then test it, the whole workflow. Is really a good way to um, because they basically are mentor to you, your team,
Mhm.
your teammates or the other senior guy there, and the
Yeah.
whole that's the protocols the company already set it for you. That's a good learning resource that you can learn that. And for startup company, that's a really good opportunity. First is for you to apply what you learn from enterprise companies
Mhm.
and to those startup companies. Let's say um, in Intech or Scotia, I saw them do things in a certain way, and I just use that to lingo and see whether that can improve our development workflow, whether that can make everyone feel much more comfortable. A good example is I can bring up is maybe is Jira, because I know many companies are working on an agile style, but maybe in some of them, or for me in the beginning, I'm not really that experienced, or even I used Jira before, but I didn't really get many points of why we're doing in this way. But after some I won't say failure, but lesson learned from Lingo, and
Yeah.
compare with how Scotia or Intech did for Jira, how they do the sprint review and the planning, and how they manage in the Jira board. Then I can take the lesson learned there to apply to Lingo, and then I can get all immediately get the feedbacks from the founders or the other coworkers. They will say, "Oh, this is great. We hope like we can done this much earlier." So that's definitely a good lesson for me. And the other way is um, in startup is a very unique opportunity and a skill like you can practice your different set of skills, because in an enterprise company maybe you're joining as a junior and you only have other people managing you, but for startup company you get more opportunities to managing other people. For me, like I can manage other developers, so um, I can know like I can kind of learn from the practice how I should manage them, how I should assign tasks to them and review their deliverables. And that's very pressure, because maybe in enterprise company, I won't get this type of chances maybe
Mhm.
around 5 years later. But that's important. That can benefit me back at working at an enterprise company, because when my manager or director did something, and I can better understand why they want to do it in that way, and actually can make me easier to communicate with them and maybe exchange our ideas about the project, about the work, etc. And yeah, and leadership actually is very important to build, even if maybe you're kind of junior, you are not really managing anyone. But if you're working on a project, leadership is always will be appreciated. You should take ownership of part of the project, like whichever part you are focused on. You want to be the one maybe to push the whole project forward, and you want to be more proactively contacting with other teams or other departments, without always the other senior guy and pushing you and telling you like, oh, you should reach out to them for something. But you can be a driver in the team. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that's really cool how you mentioned that there are kind of like different ways to grow in both startup and enterprise,
Hmm.
both as a manager and as an engineer. So thanks so much for that. I think that was super informative.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's really like you can take you can take different roles, and you can understand them better. That's that can make the communication easier and make your work easier.
So I have a fun question to ask you. I hope nobody from Intact or Lingo is watching. But from what I'm hearing, then so you've done these two. The two things that you still have to do, in my opinion, is um, working as an independent consultant, right? Which means making a lot of money, but
No.
not having the security of getting a paycheck every 2 weeks or every month. And then the second thing is having your own startup company. Which one do you think is going to happen first? Or
For me, like,
based on
I-
your experience, do you think that's actually something you want to do at some point? Not now, maybe, I don't know, 10 years from now, but
yeah.
is it
I was-
something that's, now that you've worked in a startup, is this something that you want to do?
I never really thought about it because I think having one full-time and already a part-time job can make my life already pretty full. And I really like both of the job, like Lingo or Intact. I don't intend to leave either of them.
That's why I said I hope nobody's watching.
but that's still true. Like, because working in Lingo also gave me the sense of commitment. But let's go back to your question, like why, whether I celebrate. But I will really say, like, establish a startup company is not that easy, especially in the financial part, because I saw our founders. She primarily worked alone to get all the fundraising and do all the pitches and try to get all the get into different programs so that we can get funding so that we can keep Ingo alive. That's really takes a lot of time. Like, she works maybe 70 hours per week sometimes. That's really awesome. Like, she can really do that, but I don't think I will be that kind of family, to be honest. Yeah, and it definitely you require different sets of skills that you need to learn how to represent yourself and represent the whole company, and you trying to get other interests in your company so that you can get their investment. And sometimes you have to be strong, be determined to argue with your investors if they have different opinions with you about the direction of the company. So you have to tell them, no, this is the way I think that's the best for my company. And even though you invested in me, I still trying to argue with you without being afraid, like losing your money. So that's a tough question to make. So that definitely requires certain personalities. So yeah, maybe I won't start up a company in near future, but working as an independent consultant, I think that's very interesting. First, you can get the chance to explore different fields without being constrained to your full-time job, and actually helping them to solving their problem can make you have the feeling of fulfillment. Because let's say for Lingo, they are really helping people with the under non-verbal conditions, and the users really send out some videos or feedback, like they using Lingo, and their communication gets better, and the people who using it and their caregivers or guardians feel much happier. So that can make you, oh, I really did something to help someone who really using Lingo and make their life better. So that type of thing, I won't say like you can't get it in the enterprise company. If you can get that one, that's really good. But doing some independent consulting maybe give you more opportunity to help different fields of people. Let's say they need some software technologies or machine learning method or data science tools to improve their products so that you can improve other people's life. That's a really good thing.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. It's really cool to talk about kind of like the different aspects of like what future paths you can take given your super unique experience.
Yeah.
And you alluded to this earlier. So you talked a bit about, okay, kind of having a full-time enterprise job while having a part-time startup job is already, a lot of time commitment, a lot of like projects, basically a lot of things on your plate. So building on that, what were the main reasons that made you continue working on both a startup on the side as well as like having your full-time enterprise job?
Yeah, that's a good question. it kind of, I could probably mention many points. Like first, you give me unique experience. Like I cannot get it if I only work for enterprise team or a company or a startup company. And to my opinion, working in different settings and especially in different roles actually can benefit my different works in return. Like working in startup as taking more management responsibility gave me opportunity to take more management opportunities that can help me to be a better maybe team player in a bigger team. Yeah, and so that's basically why and I can maybe another big reason I cannot just stay with start with the startup company, focus only on the startup company is if there's not much experienced people in some cases, then the enterprise team actually provide you with a really good sources to get mentors and learn from others, like how things have been done in a more mature organization, and you can help the startup company to build in that way. And this experience is quite unique, and I can you can learn a lot of things from that as well. And of course, enterprise company can give you some security in different ways, like especially financial, and maybe it's less stressful. And for startup company, like you can explore some fancy stuff if you want, and maybe the founder can give you more flexibility to test what you think that can be cool, and maybe that's not that stable. So some enterprise team won't take it, but give you the opportunity to really try it out and see how it works. Yeah, startup company can be more agile, or they can shift to the most state-of-art techniques very quickly because they don't have much cost to do the shifting. So yeah, that's a different. So just to take different benefits.
For sure. So I have a quick follow-up question to that. I know that you kind of talked a bit about this earlier, but your career path is especially interesting to me because what you mentioned, like working in enterprise and startups have a lot of like benefits. There's just like a lot of learning that you can do in both of those fields. So how do you manage your time? Like how does time management work for you if you're working like two jobs? Like how do you have time to, I don't know, play video games, like walk your dog, make food, and other things? Like how do you have time for everything? Do you have any tips for our viewers?
Oh, yeah, that's like there was a tough time for me, especially last year. I feel like it's too stressful to take in both positions. That's made up almost all of my time. I feel like I don't have enough time to rest. So I was saying first to get a full-time job, like you don't have to work overtime too frequently. So that'll save you a lot of time. If like I know some full-time job can already take up most of your time, then unless you're very, very energetic, then don't take a separate job. Otherwise you will fail on the full-time one. And on the other side, it's more like on the lingo part, I try to talk to the founder and let them know when I got more time, and maybe sometime I will be busier. So my working hour is not like say fixed 20 hours per week, but it's making me more flexible. And if it permits, I will just reduce my hours there, and maybe just doing more management and review type of tasks, but instead of really doing too much of the development tasks. And this, because we have awesome developers and they can do their own job, maybe just need me to be their help solving the problem and do the brainstorming or do the sprint management, etc. Then that can save me a lot of time. And the other tips is just try to keep a routine of your life and save time. Well, because I realized like without doing the full time, all my time was just spent maybe on Netflix, on YouTube, or on iPhone. So I try to take other types of entertainment can refresh my energy. Let's say doing some exercises or taking a walk instead of just lying on the bed and watching Netflix. But I still also do, but not that frequently because, yeah, just because those won't. Maybe it sounds like cozy, but it's not. Sometimes it's not the best way to recover or take a rest. Yeah.
I also have a follow-up question related to things you were talking about in terms of technologies, the difference in terms of technology. So, is there anything specific that you can share with us about the things that you've been using? And I think the term that you used was shiny, if I remember correctly. So you said that there are some shiny things that you can use in a startup that is really hard to use in an enterprise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the sprinkle of machine learning that everybody's talking about, or like the state-of-the-art models and things like that. So and it doesn't have to be just related to machine learning, but is there anything that you can share with us that you have experimented with in Lingo that you probably, it would have been harder to convince somebody at Intact or Scotia to do it? Any cloud technology, any solution, I don't know, anything that you feel like you can share?
That's a good question because I will say especially for Scotiabank, it's a banking system, so they may put security over all the other stuff. So let's say maybe not so shiny or so state-of-the-art technologies, it's kind of hard to get deployed in Scotiabank. Let's say my previous team, we almost fight for using Google Cloud for over 1 year. There's always just some security issue, like they are not comfortable enough for you to put your clients, this they call PII in data, the personal identification information, onto some cloud form. So in that sense, anything you can use is just any tool they build in-house. So if you're working in that setting, then yeah, it's kind of hard to use some cloud services like Google or Amazon. And for Intact, it's kind of interesting because in Intact Data Lab, they want to make sure their results are consistent as possible across different province or business lines. So they kind of set up the baseline methodologies for you to train a model, actually pick up a model for you. And what you do is to basically do the parameter selection or feature selection. So you don't really get a chance to train explore different types of machine learning models. And maybe this one doesn't really apply to Lingo, but let's apply to my corp term in Deloitte these days. Like kind of a startup inside of Deloitte. It gives us the flexibility to just explore any types of NLP models we want to use or we think that might benefit our project. It's at that time like I get very more familiar with different methods like a BERT or what else, the attention or a transformer model, etc., etc. But if I just work on the enterprise companies, maybe if your team didn't choose use that one, maybe you have less opportunity to explore those. And for Lingo, that is kind of special because it's really focused on the speech therapies. So the requirement is really unique. I will say the problem we try to solve is very different from other software products. So that part, like communicating with the speech therapists and try to get their understanding. Maybe it's not technology specific, but that experience is quite interesting. And I will say like in Lingo we use serverless framework, and I'm not sure how popular it is in the other companies, but I think it's pretty new, and maybe not all the companies will use this framework, and it's very good for startup without many customers, and that's a good experience to explore this type of framework as well. Yeah.
Nice. That's
Yeah,
a good
thanks so
answer.
much for Yeah, I think that's really interesting, especially how you kind of talked about the technologies you use also depend on the data that you have and just like the privacy policies that surround it, any like PII or like things that to make sure that you protect customer data. So I
Hmm.
think that's a really good segue into talking about just like your experience in finance and anti money laundering.
Yeah.
So how do you define AML, and what are the baseline or classic approaches to solving problems in this field? And what are some modern ways without sharing too much information if you sign like an NDA or there's like proprietary? So what are some approaches or modern ways that you guys have approached it in your teams before?
Yeah. So to define AML, we maybe can talk about money laundering first, not machine learning, but money laundering. Money laundering is, as you, as the name says, is just trying to wash the money so that they can cover the source of the funds or the destination of the funds. It's type of financial crime because the money may be just from some illegal business such as drug trafficking or human trafficking, and the destination it can be using to support some terrorists, and it can be used to evade taxes, and these are very kind of serious type of money laundering. And I also found like there are some less serious activity will also kind of scope in is a bigger picture. Sometimes it just simply you didn't use the banking system or the services they provided as it expected. If you're not using it appropriately, so those type of things can also scope in a larger definition of money laundering. So anti-money laundering is just basically we try to find out those suspicious activities and try to identify which clients they are doing some suspicious or illegal activities. They are taking advantage of our banking system, and we're trying to kind of blacklist them and demarking them, and even we want to report to the police. And sometimes we are just helping the police to gather some evidences. I see whether some entities or whether they are have this, are doing some money laundering activity. Yeah, that's pretty much for the definition for AML. And speaking of the methodologies or baseline um, method to do this type of task, maybe I can only speak for my previous team. And there are some very simple ways to do this. It kind of related to anti-fraud as well. Sometimes the simplest way is citing some alerting mechanism. Let's say if your system detect some account have suddenly large transaction volumes, then you should send alert to the system, and you maybe sometimes it can be some investigators manually looking at those transactions and see whether those are fraud or money laundering related or suspicious, any type of suspicious activity. And also machine learning or technology also play part of it. Like you can train some model to kind of do a classification model, do a classification and try to predict whether this transaction, this type of activity or this pattern of a transaction, are they suspicious or not? And then some other investor can really take a look at it. And without talking about too much detail, but I think another interesting thing I learned from my previous team in Scotiabank is they try to recover the financial network because to do money laundering, there are roughly 3 steps. First is called placement. It just try to get whatever money you got from and try to fit them to some legal banking system or financial institute. And the second step is layering. You basically do all the different types of transactions, transacting from company to company, from country to country, and try to make the source of the money very hard to find. And the last step is destination. It just try to, or integration. Is try to, because in the end, the criminals want to use the money, so they have to gather all the money together to some source, and they can do other stuff. So in Scotiabank, I think that technology very interesting. Try to recover this full picture, try to connect try to identify the connection between different, let's say, banking accounts. Maybe they belong to different people, or maybe they belong to the same people. But we want to know how we can detect, are these two banking accounts, do they belong to the same or related entities? And if so, we can have a better picture about their financial network, about their transaction activities. And so in this way, we can try our best to recover the whole workflow or transition flow from the source to the destination. That will be very useful for us to detect whether those are they really trying to use the banking system to wash their money or doing some inappropriate businesses. And yeah, that's quite interesting. And they basically use like so-called entity resolution technology. That's also very interesting. Maybe not widely used in other setting, like because nowadays when we talk about machine learning, maybe just all about neural network. No one talk about some entity resolution stuff like that, but that can be very useful in AML.
So I have a follow up on this.
Mm-hmm.
So you talked about training a classification model, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about the features that are used to train a model like that, other than, I don't know, just the regular, this much money was pulled from this destination to this source to that destination?
Mm-hmm.
Is there any other type of feature that is being captured in order to train a model? And similar to that, I think another way that I've seen different organizations use, I've seen papers on it as well, is using basically a graph representation. So it doesn't have to be a graph neural network. It can be just a regular graph of entities, right? So
Mm-hmm.
for that, similar to this question, so I think those features that I asked about could eventually be translated into the links between these nodes within the graph, right? So how do you define these? Is it just the amount of money, let's say aggregated at a certain level, let's say at a daily basis, or are there other interesting features too?
Mm-hmm. Before jumping to the specific features, there's one policy in banking system they call Know Your Client, KYC. That's basically saying how complete the information of the client you have. So it's kind of can somehow translate to some risk scores. Like if you have full validated information of the customer, then the customer may be more likely to be trustworthy. But if you have limited information, and you cannot really validate those information whether the identity is authentic or not. Maybe they have high risk score. And there are other features. I know like sometimes they use the transaction time and the transaction frequency, and also the location of the transaction, because there can be some branch or ATM. They are some at the lower population areas, but if you suddenly got a high volume or irregular transaction activity there, then there can be something interesting you want to look at. So all this type is more about capturing the pattern of the transaction. You want to first know what's a normal pattern based on time, location, and maybe you want to group your customers into different groups, and for each group, like what's their usual behavior, and then you want to train the model on top of that and try to detect any irregular behaviors on top of that. And speaking of the graph representation, yeah, that's exactly like what my previous team trying to do. They just represent the whole financial network in the graph. And sorry, what's the question about the graph representation?
I just want so no major question. I just wanted to say that those features can also be translated into links, right?
Yeah. So how you build the links is really about the feature, and the features basically we can take in as much data as we could get. First of all, it's all your personal information, like your name, your date of birth, your address, and your gender, and your position, which company you work for, etc., and which branch you open the account, which branch you usually withdraw or deposit your money, and that's one. And of course, all through different banking channels like check or email money transfer or the other type like wire transfer, etc. Who are the sender or receivers of your transaction, and what are the amount and frequency? And very interesting. Like we also try to grab some company information. We try to score their websites and get their, let's say, their CEOs and their directors, their employees information, also their company email address and address, and then we can detect kind of in our model we want to do a resolution, and we want to connect the company together with the user, so we can know, like, even though the account is personal individual account, but maybe they are using it to do the businesses, which is actually inappropriate. So why they want to do this? Because they want to avoid some sanctions. Because if they open a commercial or company bank account, there will be more due diligence need to be done. So that's a red flag, like you want to pay attention to, and because we are not handling like the anti-money laundering activities inside Canada, but also there can be international. So you can imagine, like, my previous team was using the export and import data of some countries, try to match it with the SWIFT transfer, which is like international wire transfer, and trying to see that whether they match, like how this company shipped the cargoes and how they send the money to each other, and whether they can match, and let's see whether we can find anything interesting from there. Because like I said, like money laundry, they really try to cover their track, so they can just do as many transactions as they can, transfer in different countries and companies. And because of many concerns about privacy or securities, the institutions or countries, they don't really do the data sharing. Let's say Scotia don't have the account information of TD Bank. So as long as your money transferred out of Scotiabank, we don't know where it will go to. And if it comes from the other bank, we don't know where it comes from. So we'll try really hard, like using the any common information or public information we can find to recover this map or this graph of the transaction of the entity, that find their link.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. I actually have a follow-up question related to that. So I know you mentioned kind of like being in like Canadian sort of jurisdiction, and you also talked about how there's not that much customer information sharing between banks, which makes a lot of sense, right? So how do you how do different banks kind of collaborate together when a big part of AML, as you mentioned, is kind of like layering, right? So bringing your money from maybe different countries, different banks, and is there an equivalent of Bank Secrecy Act or BSA? I think they have in the US, where I think from my understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, you have to kind of collaborate like with the government. You guys collaborate with the government to, work on money laundering and anti-money laundering, problems in the industry.
I don't really have an answer for that, because I didn't really work on some project like collaborating with other institutions. But I do know we collaborate definitely with the government or the policies, because sometimes we get some info from them and they want us to help extract the data or transactions for those entities. And sometimes we find something and maybe we can report to the government and see these entities might doing something. This type of collaboration definitely happens. And I'm not sure about the data sharing part, but I know there are some knowledge sharing, at least some knowledge sharing among the bankings as well. Let's say, I remember one, I forgot if it's from RBC or from the other company, like kind of discuss with our team, like demo, kind of showcase how they did, and kind of pinpoint us like which are the areas we want to pay attention to that might be interesting. So yeah, those type of things that definitely happens.
I
Agree.
just wanted to say I hope that nobody who's watching this would use this information to build an anti money laundering situation.
Uh,
Yeah,
But
you will never know because both sides is kind of evolving at the same time.
exactly my point. Yes, so that was exactly where I was going with this, because similar to network security, right? So as
Mm-hmm.
one technique becomes more mature, then the other party also learns from this and then tries to get more complicated. Um, I mean, within the machine learning domain, people who are on the call and um, adversarial networks, right? So that's basically the same idea, because you're always trying to beat an opponent, and in this case, the money laundering people, the quote unquote criminals, are trying to beat the system based on the standards, and then you're trying to learn from their patterns, and then they change their patterns based on what they learned from the banking industry.
Yeah.
Um, Speaking of which, have you seen any interesting work that uses, let's say, generative adversarial networks to try and beat the models that are being built by the financial institutions, so that they could find, some of the back alleys, so to speak, like the the model that you're building, how is it, how stable is it, or how robust is it, basically using an adversarial network. And I asking this question, this just came to my head when I was going to ask you about something else, which is, what are some, if somebody is interested and they want to do something in this area, to do some like a personal project, what are some
Mm-hmm.
interesting things they can start with? And then I realized nobody has this kind of data, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I changed the question in my head, because then, I mean, that could potentially become something similar to a, not necessarily, but something similar to a Kaggle competition, where people could try and beat these models, right? And these models could be just a simple endpoint, right? Like an API call into the model, try and see if the the criminal activity that I'm feeding into it is going to beat it, and then try to change my pattern, the pattern that you
Mm-hmm.
were talking about. Um, and this could be very similar to a white hat hacker type of a situation, where you try to beat the system, the network security component, to try to find out what its challenges and problems are, and then go and solve it. It's better compared to the regular way of doing it, which is you wait until you get hacked, or you wait until somebody moves some criminal money, and then you say, all right, now there's a problem, there's a backdoor, we now have to go and solve it, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
long story short, have you seen anything related to adversarial networks, or anything like an open competition, anything that people who are interested could go and maybe do kind of some side projects related to anti-money laundering?
I don't really know about that. I never. But yeah, it's a kind of, to my opinion, it's a kind of hard to do some any money laundering side project because the data it just you won't get it. That's too sensitive.
Mm.
And um, maybe kind of off the topic, but if you read the news about the previous, let's say, some banks got fined because they don't do due diligence, and we know really the some terrorists using their banking system to wash the money, etc. That's not hard to detect. It's simply because don't they don't do their due diligence. That's so simple. If you check, if you validate, if you follow the formal procedure, many of these type of activities can be avoided. So that's why, like, I think now the government try to get in, and many banks got fined because they don't do their sanction properly, or they don't do their validation, the customer information, etc. Because this is the front line. If you get the fake or suspicious customer into your system, then you will be can be hard. Like you said, like, what if they just wash the money as everyone does in the daily life? Then it's really hard for us to tell. So the front line is you have to validate your customer. You have to know who they are, and you have to follow the standardized procedure to do your due diligence, to do your sanction, to do your auditing, and to make sure you have at least you have some system to looking at all this transaction instead of because if you don't have any alerting or alarming system there, they can do whatever they want, and because if you don't look at the data, you won't find it. At least if you look at the data, you can find some interesting stuff.
Yeah, I think that's. I have a quick follow-up question. I think talking about like KYC and like know your customer, and also I think you mentioned earlier having different like risk thresholds and like risk metrics also really helps, especially because usually AML teams kind of use that. So how closely do AML teams in general work with like risk and fraud? Because I think just based on readings. And I actually used to work in like risk before my program, and some of the vanilla models based on like research are like logistic regressions and decision trees and like those ensemble things. How closely do you work with like risk teams, and what kind of collaboration actually exists? Do you ever have an AML team where you have a risk person sitting in on an AML project? How does that collaboration work?
I'm not sure about the other companies, but in Scotiabank, actually AML is under risk department, so it's
Okay.
very closely. It's just directly the same department, and definitely we work very close with fraud and the sanction as well. Let's say because fraud and us are taking different focus, but we are doing some similar stuff, and our results will actually hand over to they call SIU, like Special Investigation Unit, or the sanction department. So it's like we use some machine learning technologies, and we have some suspicious entities, and we hand it over to them, and they can do some more in-depth checking, and then they can make a decision whether they want to demarcate with them or this is a false alarm. So it's very working very closely with each other.
This is interesting. We still have a few more questions, but time is running out. Again, every week I say the same thing. The 45 minutes in the middle, I never know how it passes. The first few minutes, I always think, no, this week it's not going to be more than 40 minutes, and then suddenly there's only 2 or 3 minutes left. So with that, I think that could potentially be a very good final question, because we also want to be respectful of time, both for you and for anybody who's watching. Just one last final question. If somebody is interested in working as a data scientist in anti-money laundering, do you have any guidance? What is the one thing that they should learn so that tomorrow they could apply for a job at a bank in the anti-money laundering department?
Yeah.
And this is beyond your regular Python and Tableau and things like that.
Yeah,
Anything
definitely.
specific?
Yeah, because I'm working data science in the AML field and also in insurance fields, and maybe lingo is for psychology or speech therapy field. So to me, the biggest lesson I learned, like data science is really a combination of computer science, math or statistics, and domain knowledge. And different people can have different strengths in this spectrum. So don't be afraid if you want to be a data scientist in some fields that you were not familiar with, because the domain knowledge, you can always pick it up, maybe not quickly, but definitely you are not working alone. So inside your team, there are always some domain experts you can reach out to help you, like sorting out some high level pictures of that. You don't have to know every detail after all. So for me, data scientist, you should always focus on your computer science and statistics and math skills. So I will say maybe in many, or not many, but in some data scientists, coding skills maybe not be their top priority, but I will say that's still very important to practice, and because that can facilitate all your daily work, and it can make the process much more easier because you will know how much more powerful tools to use. Yeah, and just be curious. And sometimes it really depends on your common sense to do the data science, or based on your intuition. For example, AML maybe sounds really far from you, but you can just think of what you use banking for in your daily life. And if there's any pattern deviating from that, is there any special reason, and how people should use different channels. And based on this common sense, you can already have a very good starting point to know like which you should be looking at to tackle those to find those money laundry activities. And the same for insurance. It's just there are definitely totally different fields, but they're always the other half expert. You just be proactive, reach out and make a call with them. Just don't be afraid to ask questions, and you can just trust yourself. It's very quick to pick up. Don't worry about the background. But still, you should know like domain knowledge is important. Then that's good enough.
Oh, thank you so much. No, we are beyond the mark of the hour, so Amber, I'll pass it to you for final closing remarks, and then on behalf of myself specifically, before we do that, I just wanted to thank you, Lucas, for joining us today, and everybody who's been watching us. So, off to you, Amber.
Yeah, awesome. So again, just wanted to echo what Armin said. Thank you guys for tuning in to our weekly episode of the Weekly Supervise. We're really excited to be able to, share this knowledge with you and get experts like Lucas to come and talk about, their journey. So hopefully, other aspiring data scientists can learn from them. And of course, wanted to give a huge shout out to Lucas. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your journey about like startup and enterprise and AML. It was honestly very, very interesting for me. So we'll definitely be reaching out to you after, like in the future as well. And yeah, we'll see you guys next week on our next episode. And thanks again for joining us. And hopefully you can join our Slack channel, which is in the description below. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you.
Thanks for having me today. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, bye.